Alrighty, today we're going to look at the art of the Aegean culture. Here's a map of where we are basically looking. We've got three main cultures that we're going to examine. The first one is the oldest one, the Cycladic culture, and they come from these smaller islands here. And then we will look at the Minoans, who all occupy the island of Crete. And then we will go to mainland Greece, mostly in Peloponnese, and we will look at the Mycenaeans. All of them together will form Greece as we know it. But at this point in time, we still have basically a lot of warring city-states, just like we did in Egypt, just like we did in Mesopotamia. The difference is that the Greeks will never unite into a proper Greek nation, which is why the Romans were able to conquer them so very, very easily. We're right at the beginning of the Bronze Age with the Cycladic folks, so people have learned how to combine copper and tin together to make bronze, and we can get tools and all sorts of wonderful metal objects. We don't have any very few written records that have survived, with the exception of the late Helladic period Mycenaeans. The Mycenaeans start to write down things in the Greek language, but everything else is very fragmented, and we have to determine a lot of what we know about them from the surviving artifacts. So, as I said, we will begin with our friends in the Cyclades Islands. It's believed that at one point all of this was above sea level, and then there was a great volcanic eruption which sunk most of this, which led to rumors about the lost city of Atlantis and that sort of thing. This is where it originated, so there possibly could have been some other civilization there, but nothing has survived down to us. Most of what we find from our Cycladic friends comes from their graves, and one of the most common items that we find in the graves are these ceremonial frying pans, and they're just terracotta pans that would have been used to bake bread or cook meat over a fire or something like that, but these are ceremonial. How do we know the difference? Look how elaborately it's decorated, just as was the case with some of our Mesopotamian works. Utilitarian things that were meant to be used every day were not given this sort of decorative treatment. Plus, food will get caught in all of that stuff, and you don't want that. What do we see? We see imagery from the sea. These are the Cyclades Islands, and so Mother Ocean is the source of all life. It gives them their food, it gives them their trade routes, and so it doesn't surprise us that a lot of the images from the Cycladic ceremonial frying pans are images of the sea. In this case, we've got a big boat, and you can see all the oars on the sides of the boat, and then these little swirly shapes, those are the waves of the sea surrounding our boat. And then at the bottom, we have this little triangular shape here, which is meant to mimic a female pubic area. So we are all about rebirth and resurrection and that sort of thing, which makes sense. If we find that kind of thing in a tomb, that tells us, if it's an image having to do with rebirth, that tells us that it has, they believe in some sort of afterlife. And so just as the Egyptians did in the Mesopotamians, those depictions that we see of the afterlife, and there aren't many, but they're all fairly positive. It's not a time of punishment and that kind of thing. That'll come later. That'll come very soon, as a matter of fact. But at this point, this is kind of the thing we're seeing, these little spiral shapes, waves of the sea, along with, sometimes we get fish, sometimes starfish, and then the common denominator that pops up most often is this female triangular shape that represents the Mother Ocean, or just females in general, rebirth, resurrection. Here's another one. And here's another one. This one has a big starfish on it. Starfish symbolize rebirth. Why do they symbolize rebirth? Because if anyone know why?
Because they regrow their limbs.
Exactly. If you cut off one of their arms, it grows back. So it makes perfect sense. Very good. I had to look it up. There's a couple of more starfish, more images of the sea, and that sort of this. So it's a frying pan. It's something you would use to cook food. It's something you use in your life during the day. So the fact that it's put into a tomb suggests that they would need it in the afterlife, which tells us that they think that afterlife is a lot like this one. So things that you use now, you'll need later. And we see this again and again in a lot of different cultures, burials and that sort of thing. You bury the folks with the stuff that they would need, or things they use in this life that they would need in the afterlife. There's another one. I think you get the gist of the ceremonial frying pans at this point. Other things, other tomb items. The Cycladic folks, this is unique to the Cyclades Islands, these plank idols. They're very abstract, they're very simplified, they vary in size. Some of them are small, some of them are quite large, up to 3 feet. But they all have this similar sort of appearance. They're female. It's a very rudimentary female, as you can tell by the presence of the breasts and the triangular pubic area. Would have been painted originally. There would have been faces on these, painted jewelry, that kind of thing. Why? Why did they make these? What was their function? It's unknown, but they most probably served as some sort of offering or votive figure, not really commemorative to a specific person as far as we know, because they all look very similar. It's a type. They all have this very simplified, kind of abstracted look to them. The arms crossed over the abdomen, the slightly swollen abdomen there, kind of reinforcing the idea of pregnancy and reproduction and rebirth. Those appear over and over and over. We are reminded of those votive figures from Mesopotamia that were also very simple and abstract, and served as offering figures or perpetual prayers in the afterlife. Very possible that the function of these plank idols was very similar to that. Sometimes there's slight variations in the shape, but for the most part they all have the same sort of shape to them. Another theory regarding these plank idols is that they perhaps served as a ka container or a spirit container, like the Egyptians had those attendants in the mastabas to represent the ka. It could be an image of the deceased, but there's nothing really unique to them, so we don't quite have the idea of individualized portraiture yet, like we had in some Egyptian cases with scribes and such. Here's a head that has survived down, and you can see some of the carved areas for the eyes that have maintained their shape over the centuries. Some of the paint has survived as well. The paint protected the surface from erosion, and so that's why you get those little carved divots for the eyes being still in such good shape. They can't stand up on their own. There's usually a little prop behind them or something like that. They're meant to lie down. They're not meant to be freestanding. But then the pose is very similar to our woman of Willendorf, who also had her arms crossed over her chest. Even though the proportions are different, it could be a reference to reproduction, or it could be just simply a burial pose. I found these, which I found quite interesting. These are also female figures. They're called violin Cycladic plank idols, obviously because they look like violins. They have long necks. The abstraction of the female form is even greater here, but we do still retain the triangular reference to the vaginal area and that sort of thing. Everything's just a lot more simplified. And the male figures they get little basses, and typically they're playing musical instruments for some reason, so they also may function as some sort of attendant or votive figure for the deceased. And if we compare them, you can see that the male figures are also a lot more three-dimensional. They're not meant to only be seen from the front like the female plank idols. They're meant to be seen in the round, all the way around. Some of them are quite energetic and active as far as the way that they're carved. Lots of rhythm and movement in the forms. This one's playing a lyre, and some of those open spaces in the lyre are repeated in the throne, the shape of the legs of the throne, open space all around. Unlike the Egyptians, who avoided open space in their statuary, our Cycladic friends have no problem with it. There's another one. This one's got a little bit more detail, especially in the face. I like his face because he has that sort of far-off look in his eye as he's playing the lyre, as if he's concentrating on the type of music that he's playing. And then there they are in the National Archaeological Museum in Athens. They're not large, they're only about yay big, but still very interesting. And that's it for the Cycladic cultures. I have one other tomb painting I'll show you later on, but for the most part, it's frying pans and plank idols from the Cycladic folks. But now let's look at the Minoans. They're a lot more interesting. Remember, the Cycladic peoples come from the Cyclades Islands, and now we're going down to Crete to look at our Minoans. The capital of Crete was a town called Knossos, and that's where King Minos built his palace. He was the ruler of the Minoans for a while, and he built this huge fortified palace on a hilltop. That's what remains of it today. A lot of it has been reconstructed. It was inhabited for several hundred years, and then earthquakes finally drove people out to seek more stable places to live. But in the meantime, a lot of it has been reconstructed and gives us a lot of insight into how the Minoans lived. They also gave us a lot of imagery related to the sea. They're a big island, and so they have the same relationship with the sea. It brings them food, it brings them trade. But we also see images of the bull here at Knossos. We've seen the bull before. The bulls represent fertility and power and strength and that sort of thing. But the palace at Minos has a unique relationship with the bull. There's a view from above. Note the complexity of the layout of the palace complex. There's lots of little rooms and passageways and walls and so forth. This complexity is probably the source of the myth of the Minotaur, the half bull, half human that was part of Greek mythology. He lived down in the labyrinth, which was a big maze. And every year the people of Crete would come and sacrifice 7 young men and 7 young women to the Minotaur so that he wouldn't come out and kill everyone else on the island. This one's from a kylix, which is a drinking cup, and it has an inscription on it that says, "The boy is beautiful," which suggests that this was probably a commemorative sort of cup given to someone to celebrate the birth of a son or something along those lines. There's another view of the palace at Knossos. The Minotaur actually, the whole legend, I'll just give it to you really fast. It's pretty interesting. Poseidon and Minos were chatting one day, and Minos asks Poseidon for control of Crete, and Poseidon agrees. He said, "Yeah, I'll let you control Crete, but all you got to do is sacrifice a bull in my honor, and I'll even send it to you." And so he sent this bull to be sacrificed, and it was gorgeous, beautiful animal. So beautiful that Minos decided not to sacrifice it and instead keep it for his own bullpen. And so since he went against the wishes of Poseidon, Poseidon cursed his wife to fall in love with the bull, and she copulated with it and gave birth to this horrific Minotaur, and that was his punishment for going against the wishes of Poseidon. Good story to tell the kids. That's what it would have looked like back in the day when it was still intact, before all of the earthquakes and such. Thanks. You can see that it was in good shape for a while. All of those columns you see were painted. The whole point of this was to communicate opulence and wealth and power. And so not only did they paint all of the columns, which these types of columns are unique to this area, they have a special capital on them that I'll show you in just a moment. But there are a lot of innovations here at this palace: running water, sewage, lighting, doors that open and close. Lots of developments that we have not seen up to this point. There is a plan for the palace at Knossos, and you'll need to memorize all of those different parts and be able to identify them on site. I'm just kidding, not really. I make that joke every year because it's hilarious. Because it's a labyrinth, it's a maze. See, put them side by side, and of course, yes, the labyrinthine maze with the Minotaur. I get it, Waterfield. You don't have to beat that dead horse. So it's too late. Horse is already dead. All right. Few other items that have survived from Minos. This altar with the big limestone bull's horns on it is one of the first things that visitors to the city would see. They would pull up in the port and get off their ships and enter into the palace and be greeted by this giant altar with bull's horns. Lots of other bull imagery greeted them as well. Just a way to kind of intimidate visitors, scare away evil spirits, all of those things. This little bit of a porch has been reconstructed so that you can kind of get a sense of the elaborateness of decor that they would have had. Brightly painted red columns. There's a closer view. And you can see just behind it a big fresco, a high relief painted fresco, again of another bull, right behind it there. Bulls everywhere, all over Knossos. Now these columns you see here were wooden, which is unusual. The shape may have come from the Egyptians, but the capital is called an echinus, which is another word for sea urchin. It looks like a squashed cushion. And those types of columns are unique to the Minoans. A word that is similar to Echinus is entassus, and that has to do with the taper or the angle of the taper of the column. It's wider at the top and then gets gradually smaller as you go down, which is the opposite of how later Greek columns are. They are bigger at the bottom and then get smaller as you go up to the top. Be sure you know the difference between Echinus and entassus, and that's not a joke. Another innovation, so that we have several stories, several levels that you can go down into the palace, and in order to get light down to those lower levels, they created sort of an atrium, a light well. The whole function is for ventilation and light to be able to make its way down to the lower levels of the palace. The columns and frescoes change colors depending on what area of the palace you're in, to let you know that you're in a banquet hall or slave quarters or what have you. The color scheme would change, which is pretty ingenious, especially since our Aegean folks drank mostly wine. And you know, when you had a lot of wine, you need all the help you can get to get right back to the area of the palace that you're supposed to be in, and not just wandering around. There's another light well, and you can see it does what it needs to do, light and ventilation to the lower levels. And then here are some areas of the palace with specific motifs on the wall to identify whether it's slave quarters or an audience chamber or what have you. This is an interesting room in the palace, the royal villa, and it has what's called a polythera, which is a big stone door that can be opened or closed. It sits on a big stone hinge, and you can close off the room if you need to for privacy or what have you. This is the first instance we've seen of that. And then it also has its own private small light well, and then there's a bathing area there as well. Now, how do we know? I mean, if they're made out of wood, how do we know what these columns looked like? How do we know what color they were? What's the evidence of that? Well, we have surviving fresco fragments that have made their way down to us that show us exactly how they looked and what color they would have been and that sort of thing. The frescoes we see with the Minoans are almost all buon fresco, or fresco painted onto wet plaster. Remember, the Egyptians preferred to paint fresco secco, or onto dry plaster. And the difference is that the fresco secco is a lot faster, but it doesn't last as long. With the buon fresco, the paint actually bonds with the wall itself and is a lot more durable. There are specific rooms for storage called magazines, and they would store big amphora full of oil and grain and honey and wine and that sort of thing, depending on what area of the palace you were in. And this is also where they would stage boats for trade. You would load up the boats, supply them from the magazine, and then off they would go to sell whatever they were going to sell to other cultures in the area. This is the Queen's megaron, or her audience chamber. This is where she would be seated to receive visitors, and you can see the motif there is dolphins. Dolphins leaping out of the water, as well as a lot of little fish. And then we have our spirals that represent the rolling waves of the sea. And then we have another motif, these little rosettes, these little flowers here. Remember, we saw those in Mesopotamia. So what does that tell us? It tells us that the Minoans most likely traded with the Mesopotamians and adapted that motif into their own work. We see that fairly frequently. If one culture sees something that another culture is doing and they like it, they'll adapt it. They'll make it part of their own, and that's what's happened here. You can even see they've covered up the traditional spiral waves with the rosettes because they like them a lot better. There's another view. Dolphins are fairly accurately portrayed, as are the smaller fish, and they're very animated. They look like they're jumping and leaping over the waves, which is exactly what they would have been doing. And then there's a pot that has survived that has the spirals on it. If we go right off to the side of the Megaron, we find the Queen's bathroom. And she's got the sea motif along the walls, as people tend to do with bathrooms, no matter where they're located. You always seem to have a sea life motif, even in Nebraska. Lots of beaches and shells and that sort of thing. And you can see her tub there. Private bathing area. Slaves would come in and fill up the tub and then wash her. And then right next door was her flush toilet. There's the Queen about to take her bath, and there's her surviving bathtub that has made its way down to us. And then you can see sort of a reconstruction of what the whole bathroom would have looked like. And I knew you would be interested, so I found the toilet too, with the drain hole. I'm not sure quite how it worked, but they were able to flush the toilets and have sewage that ran out of the city through pipes and so forth. It doesn't look that comfortable, but I'm sure it was better back in its day. And just so you know what I'm talking about, these are the types of bathrooms I'm talking about. Good solid Nebraska bathrooms with lots of corn and tractors, and it's always the ocean for some reason. I guess because water comes out of the faucet. That's all I can think of that would relate it to the sea. But that's what we do. Elsewhere in the palace, we have the king's throne room, and you can see the throne is up on a little dais there, so he can sit higher than everyone else. And then behind him, we have images of local flora, grasses, sea grasses, and that sort of thing. There's also some images of griffins painted on the wall there. That's what it looked like when it was being excavated. And then here it is today. You can see we've got some seating around the rest of the throne room so that his attendants and other nobles can sit beside him and give him advice as he meets visiting dignitaries and that kind of thing. There's one of those griffins painted on the wall in the background, half lion, half eagle. It tends to be a royal symbol, kind of a protector symbol, like the Lamassu and the Sphinx. The griffins show up in that capacity. It sits right across from a little bathing area, a ritual bathing area that he can see from the throne, and then you can see in the bathing area those same types of columns with the what type of capital? Whoa, quizzes. Who said anything about quizzes? What are those called? You remember? Reese, what do you think?
The U.S. one.
No.
It ends with U.S.
Yes, it does.
That's how I'm going to distinguish it in my brain.
Sweet. Now, what's it called?
I don't know.
Give it a try. Yes, Ms. Hartman.
Isn't it
Echinus, and it represents a what? A sea urchin. Very good, very good. Now you'll all remember. Good. Here's another image of a bull, very similar to the one that we saw earlier. You can see it is a relief sculpture. It projects from the background very slightly, and then it's painted to be more realistic. A lot of detail and accuracy given to the depiction of the bull. The anatomy appears pretty correct. Lots of bull images have survived now. This is a rhyton, which is a ceremonial pouring pitcher. You would pour scented oils or honey or wine or something like that for certain religious rites that would take place. It's made from stearite, which is a really super dark green stone. The horns are gilded, which means they have a layer of gold on the outside, and then there's some shell inlay for the eyes and nose, and then the smaller details are actually etched into the surface there, and you can see it's really precious. I love his little curls on top. Those are just adorable. And then all of these extra details carved into the surface, and then they would rub a sulfur powder into those to make them kind of stand out a little bit, a technique called niello. Another ceremonial pitcher, this one made from rock crystal or quartz. Again, just to give you a sense of things that are precious and ceremonial, made out of uncommon materials. Some more artifacts that have survived: the double-headed axe with double blades. Those are unique to the Minoans. They're votive. They're offerings. They are left in tombs to pay tribute to the deceased. They could be also left in temples to pay, bless you, tribute to various deities and so forth. It suggests also the fact that so many of these have been recovered. It's an axe, for one. And what do we do with axes? Chop trees. What else do we do? That's right. You kill people with them. So that tells us that the Minoans had a feisty side. They were ready to go to war and protect themselves whenever they needed to. But it really only appears with these axes. We don't see a whole lot of other very warlike images with the Minoans. We see that with the Mycenaeans, and we'll see that here shortly. Gold, bronze. The Minoans were accomplished goldsmiths. This is a little pendant that has a couple of wasps, and they're holding either a ball of pollen or something like that. And it's decorated in what's called the granulation technique, where they solder these little tiny balls of gold in specific patterns to give it this nice decorated rhythmic surface. And then these little bits, which are also balls of pollen or nectar or something like that, they dangle. So it's an animated thing. Sometimes, or you can see it here, another little ball of pollen in a little cage, and it kind of rattles around too. So lots of movement, lots of energy with these things. Now let's look at their wall paintings. We see some in their tombs, but we also see it in the palace itself. This is probably one of the most famous surviving murals from the palace at Knossos. It's called the Toreador fresco. What it is showing us is not a bullfight, but it's a coming of age ceremony for young men. As part of their journey into manhood, one of the things that they would be expected to do is perform a somersault over the back of a bull. And that's what this guy's doing right here. He's in mid-somersault. He's being assisted by two women on either side. How do we know one's male and one's female? Skin tones. Remember, women are traditionally very pale, and men are very tan and dark because they're swarthy outdoorsmen. The bull is very calligraphic and energetic. He's in mid-stride. Lots of movement, lots of motion here. This is very unlike what we saw with the Egyptians in their very stiff, superficially posed paintings. And just in case you're trying to wrap your head around exactly what's happening, this is the process. You literally take the bull by the horns, and then it angrily flips you over its back. You land on its back and then jump off. And if you survive, you've made it to manhood. Congratulations.
Every dude had to do that?
What's that?
Every dude had to do that? Like every guy? Or is it like...
I don't know. I hope not. because it wouldn't be your boy here. I wouldn't be flipping over that bull. I guess so. I think so. I've never read anything that said any specific male, but that's a good question. I'll look that up, see if I can find that answer for you.
Do you think like the ladies on the side are representing what he does before and after? Because she's grabbing the horns, and then he's in motion, and then he lands them in. Kind of.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, I know they're different color though. I guess maybe it's his ghost.
I don't know. Everything I've ever read says that they're females,
Yeah.
and he's the male performing the act, and they are sort of assisting.
Yeah.
So like he's in mid jump, and so she's stabilizing the bull, grabbing the horns, so that something bad doesn't happen. It's possible. They didn't write anything down, so your guess is as good as anyone else's. So it's just a closer view, so you can see how all of that was put together. The dark parts are the original parts, and then the lighter parts are reconstructions. In addition to this mural of the bull leaping ceremony, we have found some, I say we, like I've been over there excavating or something. They have found three-dimensional sculptures of leapers or divers. They could be diving for clams or oysters or something like that. Same sort of general pose. A number of those have survived down to us. And if you don't make the jump, they even recorded that. So here's someone who got impaled on the horns and hit the bull wrong and did not make it to manhood. God rest his soul. This is a sarcophagus that has survived from Crete, which gives us a little bit of information. They buried their dead. They didn't burn them. So that's why we have sarcophagus, a big stone casket. And on the outside of the sarcophagus, we see the deceased being kind of led into the afterlife. We have a tomb over here with a portrait bust. And then we have people bringing offerings to the tomb to commemorate the deceased. It has this very earthy palette, kind of a blondish sort of color scheme to it. Primary colors, blue, yellow, red. And it all has a kind of look to it. The poses here sort of harken back to Egypt a little bit, where we are painting what we know about the person rather than how they actually look. This is a lot more formal, so it makes sense that we would see them portrayed in a more formal way. There's an alternate view, all done in Buon fresco. There's the spelling for you, Buon fresco, painted onto wet plaster, versus fresco secco, which is painted onto dry plaster. And then there's a view of the end, where we see a griffin pulling a chariot with what we assume to be the soul or the spirit of the deceased on into the afterlife. This is a painting of a Minoan woman called the Parisian, because she has these very red lips. It looks like the cosmetics that the Parisian women were wearing in the 19th century whenever this was uncovered. It's very gracefully done. There's a lot of movement and fluidity to it. It's still a profiled head with a frontal eye, just like we had in Egypt, but it's not quite as stiff and angular as our Egyptian versions. There's the actual fragment, and then here the Egypt. A few other surviving paintings. This is the mistress of the animals. It's not in good shape, but she's probably some sort of deity, and she's sort of overseeing different kinds of animals. They're birds, monkeys, cats, and that kind of thing. The anatomy is a little off, proportions are a little bit off, but it's still very fluid and curvilinear, compared to what we saw in Egypt. Here's another one. Young girl gathering crocuses, which are flowers. And she also is very fluid and graceful and curvilinear versus the very angular Egyptian style. There's also more of an attention to detail with the accuracy of the anatomy, and you can see it in the arms, the way that the arms are wider at the elbow and then taper to the wrist, that type of thing. Again, we are observing details pretty closely. We have one of the first pure landscape paintings in the history of art recovered from the Minoans. It's stylized. Those are supposed to be sand dunes with the sea grasses growing out of them. And then we've got swallows kind of flying in and out of here. It's called a springtime image because all these flowers are blooming and the birds are making out as they're flying and all that sort of, it's rebirth and resurrection and all that sort of stuff. There's another view.
When was that discovered?
What year?
Yeah.
Don't know. Most of this was excavated in the 19th century at some time, so mid-1800s. I don't know how much of it has been. It's ongoing with as far as reconstruction goes.
Is it still in the same place it was found? Or did they?
Mm-hmm.
It is. Okay.
Yep. There's a close view of the swallows, how they're pecking their little beaks together. It's cutie, romantic, springtime sort of image. Another interesting image that has survived are the blue monkeys. There's a fresco covered with all these blue monkeys. Now, blue monkeys, monkeys in general, don't live on Crete. They're not native to Crete, but they are native to North Africa, which is close by. So that tells us that the Minoans more than likely had contact with the Africans, probably even traded for a few monkeys. The king would have wanted some kind of special menagerie to show his status and that kind of thing. Yet another example of contact with the African continent. We've got Egyptian influences in the paintings. We've got the presence of monkeys in these murals. Those are all African things. They're not native to Crete. There's another view of some of the monkeys. Monkeys also very animated and curvilinear and energetic. They look very lifelike compared to some of the other things that we've seen. I did want to look at a couple of Cycladic frescoes that survived. They are not quite as developed as the Minoan frescoes. The color palette is the same. The motifs are the same. And you can see the jumping dolphins here in the background from this Cycladic mural look very similar to the dolphins in the Queen's Megaron back at the Palace of Knossos. What do we have? It's a harbor scene. Here's the city built next to the harbor there, and then we have some sort of processional flotilla coming and going, probably some important people here. And they all have a variety of poses too, which is kind of interesting. They're not all clones of one another. They sit with their backs to each other and they have conversations. And then you got people steering the boat and they have a different pose. So there's this awareness of the variety of humanity, which is kind of interesting. Overall, compared to what we just saw, it's not quite as developed and animated. That's just another view. If we jump back to the Minoans, here is an image of a young fisherman holding his prize catch. Probably not really a portrait of a specific person, but it might be. Maybe this is a young man who was known for his fishing skills. He's holding these huge, heavy strings of fish, and they're so heavy, you know, normally if it were Egyptians, they'd hold them out like this. but he's bracing his arms against his body and straining to hold them all up. So it's very naturalistic and believable, the result of keen observation. Same is the case with his muscles. And you can see just the taper of the arm, the bicep, that sort of thing. Those are all observational details. He's wearing a princely lock too. This is seems to be the standard Minoan hairstyle, a shaved head except for one big braid that comes off the side. Here's another one, the boxing children. I like this one because it's got a little psychology to it. Very graceful, fluid, organic bodies. Who's going to win the fight? Guy on the left or the guy on the right?
Probably left.
Why?
I don't know if it's just the markings and he has longer hair.
Who's been in a fight? Who's punched someone before?
I feel like the guy on the left's gonna win because he's got the guy on the right's got his hand way back here.
Exactly.
The guy on the left has
Exactly.
two hands. He's gonna like double punch him.
You're exactly right. That is exactly right. So this guy has dropped his left. He's dropped his defense, and he's getting tagged by this guy with his left. And the other guy's already got his arm cocked to give him a 1-2 punch. He's gonna take him right out. Good observation. Yep, that's exactly what's happening there. So what is this? Another sort of coming of age sort of ceremony. Some deities that have survived, the snake goddess images have survived down to us. They all look very similar. There's an emphasis on her femininity with the exposed breasts. Breasts always a symbol of sustenance and nurturing and that sort of thing. But then she also has the snakes. And if you've read your Freud, you know that snakes are phallic symbols. So they represent maleness. So you have maleness and femaleness together representing fertility and reproduction, which is also underscored by the little bunny on top of her head. Rabbits always symbols of reproduction and that kind of thing. And there's a whole bunch of these that have survived down. They all look very similar. I'm throwing this one in just to let you know that this doesn't go away. The emphasis on female breasts. We start with the woman of Willendorf, and in art today, they're very prominent. In the case of the 17th century painting of the Madonna and Child by Jean Fouquet, you can see the idealization of the female body, the perfect spherical shaped breast on the Madonna there. Why is it perfect? Because she's the mother of God, and so you want to portray her as perfectly as you possibly can. The irony is the model for the Virgin Mary here was the king's girlfriend, who was had a very loose reputation in the court. Here is a surviving statue of a male figure, possibly a god made from Egyptian gold and ivory, gold that can be geologically traced back to Egypt. So that is another bit of evidence that shows contact between the Minoans and the Egyptians, North Africans. And he has that same hairstyle, the shaved head with the single braid that indicates he's a young man. Very similar to the Egyptian hairstyle for young men. We also have some examples of Minoan pottery. 3 basic styles. The first one is Chimeras ware. And Chimeras ware has light designs on a dark background, and they're all images of the sea, monsters and octopuses and fish and that sort of thing, but they're very animated. The value contrast gives it a really energetic sort of motif. Here's another example of chimeras where I never really understood this one. The fish that vomits nets. I guess you use nets to catch fish, but I don't know why he's puking one up unless, it's a really, really big fish, something like that. Other scrolly shapes, waves of the sea, all marine motifs that we've seen before. Here's one that shows a nice flower, or it could be the sun. Here's one more showing various floral forms. And not only do they take the form of big jugs, but we see chimeras were examples of cups and mugs, that sort of thing. The second style is the marine style, and those are positives on negative backgrounds, but they're all marine images. So again, fish, octopi, that sort of thing. Very animated. I always liked this one because it looks like the tentacles are kind of wrapping around the jug itself. Looks like something that they would have seen. They would have actually seen this octopus maybe in a little tidal pool or something, down to the shapes of the little suckers, the shapes of the eyes, all of that stuff very accurately observed. Here's another one, different octopus. And then here's one with some kind of octopus sea monster thing with a few little fish surrounding it. Very animated, lots of rhythm, movement, repeated patterns and motifs. And yet one more, this one with some added relief sculpture on it, representing seashells. And then the third style is the floral style, and it is what it sounds like, flowers, plants, that kind of thing. These are the things that they are surrounded by. These are the things that sustain them and give them life, so it makes sense that it would be on their pottery, things they eat, plants, grains, that kind of thing. Oh, did I go backwards? No, I did not. Some papyrus. And then there are a few other vessel designs that don't fall into those three painted categories, but they're kind of interesting. So here's a bull's head vase, the bull image showing its head again. I think I've shown you at least 4 of these now. Here is one called the Leaping Mountain Goat, and it's a whole motif unto itself. There's several of these vessels that have survived that show goats jumping and leaping in the wilderness, which are kind of fun. This one is called the Harvester Vase, and it shows a bunch of workers out in the field harvesting wheat and then bringing the harvest to a deity. There's a closer view, and you can see our deity back there kind of driving them on to bring in the sheaves. And then there they are, the harvesters are singing, celebrating the harvest of the wheat as they bring it in. Not unlike what we saw with the Warka vase, with Inanna Ishtar receiving all the gifts from her faithful followers as they bring them to her. A few other bathtubs that have survived. A theory exists that these weren't bathtubs, but they were actually coffins. And then another theory says that they could have been both. Bathe in it while you're alive and then get buried in it after you kick it. So these have octopuses on the outside, little goats on the one on the right. So just really any motif that you've seen, those are also combined and used in other items as well. So we're going to leave the Minoans and head over to mainland Greece and look at the third culture that we're going to examine today, the Mycenaeans. Now, the Mycenaeans had a reputation of being kind of a very warlike people, and it's not an undeserved reputation. There's a lot of evidence to that, but they weren't just that. It's the Mycenaeans, remember, that first write the Greek language in this script called Linear B. They're the first ones to actually start recording things. So there's that. But if we look at their art and architecture, it's easy to see some of the differences between them and the Minoans. They had a relationship with the Minoans, but we're not quite sure what it was. Probably it was not the friendliest of relationships. They were most likely at war with one another. Here are the ruins of a citadel, which is simply a fortified city on a hill. Most of the Mycenaean cities are built this way to protect them from invading armies. All of these little cities, Sparta and Athens and Corinth, they're all at war with one another. So it makes sense, especially on mainland Greece, to have a defensive position for your city. And there are a few of these that have survived. Here's another one. The Minoans didn't really need this because they were all on the same island. So, but in Mycenae, at these fortified cities, a lot of them had what was called a Cyclopean wall. And the main one in Mycenae is this one with the Lioness Gate. It was called the Cyclopean Wall because the stones are so large, legend had it, that only the mighty giant Cyclops could have moved them and built this in place. The doorway has these two female lions or lionesses above it. Those are guardian figures to protect those inside the city from all enemies, seen and unseen. We have two different ways of spanning and opening here incorporated into the lion gate. We have the post and lintel method, which is what we use to build Stonehenge. And then we also have the corbelling method, where you stack successive rows of stones slightly inward so that you can get this curve. And then that will evolve into the arch, which is the third way to span an opening. Usually we leave a little space above doorways to add some sort of sculpture. Maybe it's lions, maybe it's a gorgon, maybe it's something else. There's a view from above with a local for scale, so you can get a sense of just how big and massive these stones are. And then there's a closer view of the lions, more guardian figures, and they're made of stone, so they have that psychological effect of being eternal and powerful and that kind of thing. Another view. And there's our three methods of spanning a passageway. Two of them included in this singular area. The arch we won't see for a while because that's a Roman invention. But we've seen corbelling before. We saw it in some of those passage graves. The dolmens incorporated a little bit of that. That's what it looks like. If you're claustrophobic, you probably don't want to walk down a corbelled walkway because it's only gravity holding those stones together. There's no masonry in between them. And the fact that they lean on each other, it's self-supporting. There's another alternate view of a corbelled entry. In this case, it got a little chaotic up here as we're filling in some of that material. So that's the outer area, and then we reach the palace area, and the Megaron in Mycenae was fairly similar to the way that we saw it in Knossos. Lots of frescoes, lots of painted areas, even the shapes of the columns, the taper of the entassus, very similar. Again, you want to project wealth and opulence to all of your visitors as kind of a way to intimidate them. And then we have the disposal of the dead. Initially, we began with the shaft grave. Shaft grave is what it sounds like. It's about a 25 to 40 foot pit, and families would have their own pits, and then you would dump the deceased down at the bottom of the, I guess you wouldn't dump them, you would place them carefully and respectfully down at the bottom of the pit, and then seal off the top with a stone. And then the next time you have someone kick it, you can take the stone off and place them down there and just stack them up like Pringles in the shaft grave. So this is the way they buried their dead for eons. There you can see some unwary tourists visiting what's left of a grave circle, which is how they would place all those shaft graves. Some of the graves would be marked with stone monuments called stela, and the stela would show warlike scenes, people in chariots going off to battle, but then also images of the sea. There's a coastal area right next door, so they still would have a lot of sustenance from the sea. A wide variety of images could be depicted on these stela: funerary games, processionals, all sorts of things, depending on who is interred there. And then there is a reconstruction drawing of the grave circle, complete with the stela intact here. And so then they shift and they get away from the shaft grave and the grave circle, and they begin using the tholos, or beehive tomb, which is an above ground tomb, not unlike the dolmen. So you have these stacked stones that make this little beehive, and then they bury it in a hillside to protect it from thieves and so forth. But it comes about after they have contact with the Egyptians. Why do you think the contact with the Egyptians would inspire such a thing? Does it remind you of anything? Yep. They saw these and thought, hey, that's a lot cooler way to be buried than being pitched down into a shaft and stacked like Pringles. So let's try that. So they built a sort of miniature pyramid that's hollow on the inside. You can see the corbelled stones making it curve up into the shape of an old beehive. There's a view from the inside. That triangle above the doorway there, that would have had some sort of sculpture in it. It may have even been made of gold or something, which is why it's gone, robbed in ancient times. That's how it was assembled together. Just successive rows called courses that are then progressively stacked inward in order to get this curved surface on the inside. Another view. And then there's a view from the outside. Yes, sir?
Did they also believe, like, in bringing their treasure with them to the...
Yes, they did.
Okay.
I'm about to get to that.
Sorry.
Here we are at the treasury of Atreus in Mycenae. Probably held a lot of artifacts back in the day. All gone. All the treasure's been stolen. Here is another tholos that has not survived in that good a shape, but it gives you an idea of how things used to be laid out and why this is so much cooler than being pitched down into a hole. So the shaft graves, that's where we find the treasures. Treasures that we find, you name it. Most of it's kind of militaristic, so suits of armor, weapons, that kind of thing, but not all of it. It all depends on who's buried there. This is a funerary mask, the function of which would be very similar to the death mask of Tutankhamun. You want to record the likeness of the person, and this is a pretty unique likeness with that handlebar mustache and almond-shaped eyes and so forth. This may have actually been an attempt at portraiture, and you can see even the lines of the whiskers of the beard have been included as well. It's repoussé, which means hammered out from the back. So you get a flat sheet and then you mold it into a rough mask shape, and then you very delicately hammer out from the back all of the details that you see, and then in some cases etch extra details onto the surface. And they come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and various countenances. This is one I always thought was kind of funny because it always reminded me of Uncle Fester from the Addams Family. Even the mouth shape. Uncanny. These are some gold body coverings from a child's grave in Mycenae. The gold probably came from Egypt, also another suggestion of trade between the Mycenaeans and the Egyptians. This is a rhomboid diadem, which is a crown. This would have been in a lady's grave, and this would have been a sort of head covering that she would have worn back in the day. Here's a model of what that might have looked like, and then these little face markings, face tattoos, which are Mycenaean as well. That's how that would have been worn. There it is there. The Scythians come from what is now Russia, and then the northern Middle East. This was their empire, and you can see they're pretty darn close to Mycenae. So it's not out of the question that some of these artifacts may have made their way over and then influenced the style of some Mycenaean works. And then there's our stag. And then here's one more of a panther, also Scythian, that shows us the same sort of thing. This is a Rhyton from Mycenae, another one in the shape of a bull's head. I think across the board it's safe to say still depictions of animals tend to be a lot more believable and naturalistic than depictions of humans. This is another repoussé item, the Vaphio cup, which came from Sparta. And what we see on the surface there down in repoussé is capturing bulls in the wilderness. It's some youths going out into the woods capturing bulls with nets. Again, the image of the bull, symbol of power and fertility and that kind of thing. There's what the images look like if you were to undo the cup. And then there the cups are in the British Museum through my blurry photo. Suits of armor, weapons, armor. Again, these are the things that you would expect to find from a very warlike culture, and there's no shortage of those that have been recovered. Some daggers. Daggers, probably ceremonial daggers because of the intricacy of the inlay work that we see. There are lions, there are soldiers, and then there's one soldier. Let's see, this one has fallen during a battle between soldiers and lions. So there's maybe that's a specific person who is commemorated on this dagger blade. There's a closer view. It's a bronze blade that's then inlaid with gold and silver and some of that yellow, some of that sulfurous powder. All that's then heated so that it fuses together, making a smooth surface. And there's the other side, so that's why it's displayed over a mirror. You can see this side, and then that's the other side showing more animals being attacked by lions. Mycenaean pottery, soldiers going off to war, dressed in battle gear with their spears, a sad lady waving goodbye to her soldier husband as he goes off to war. Typical of what we would expect to see from the Mycenaeans. Here's a crotter showing people in chariots going off to fight a war. And then there are a few frescoes, Mycenaean frescoes that have survived that show more soldiers and warriors and charioteers, that type of thing. Not everything is warlike. There are some of our adoring attendant figures, female attendants bringing gifts, stylistically very, very similar to what we saw with the Minoans. Very graceful, curvilinear, organic. But then we also get these types of figures, scary Medusa heads, Gorgon heads. But she does have the facial tattoos that shows us what she would have looked like back in the day. And then another surprising sculpture that has survived down to us, the three deities. We have an older woman, and then a middle-aged woman, and then a child, and they're all three done from one single piece of ivory, but they're all kind of intertwined, showing love to one another. It's very sensitive, kind of sentimental type of carving, not at all what we would expect to see from the Mycenaeans, but there it is. And then after that, we have the Greek Dark Ages kick in, which is about 450 years in Greek history, from the end of the Mycenaeans to the beginning of the Archaic Age of Greece. Not a lot of writing survives, some artifacts, but not much. Hence the term Dark Ages. We are in the dark about it, so we don't know much about it. And then once we get into Greece, they create some of the greatest works in the history of mankind. So get ready for that. And that is that.